How much does the president's personality impact his job? What does he bring to the table personally that affects what he does politically? Well, weighing in on that today is Saladin Ambar, Ph.D. and author of How Governors Built the Modern American Presidency. Thanks for coming on board and joining us today. You contend that governors perhaps bring more to the table than senators do to the presidency. Let's talk about that.
Well, I think that certainly was the case 100 years ago when the modern presidency was being formed, and no doubt that executive experience makes a difference in presidential leadership. When you look at Barack Obama's background coming out of the state Senate in Illinois and as a senator, it was a very limited kind of experience, and I think that in some ways explains why he was elected. He didn't have that long track record of a senator to thwart him in his efforts to convince the American people he was ready to be president.
The governor generally not rules but administrates from a position of authority, whereas a senator has to do it by bringing other people into the fold. Which is the bigger strength?
Well, from the electorate standpoint, if you just think about what's going on right now in Washington with the fiscal cliff, having to make compromises and deals is something that the country is built upon, but most voters don't really like that process. We're sort of turned off by it. And so the idea of being an executive and administrative leader and handling problems by yourself almost seems to strike voters as the way to go. And I think that's part of the dilemma we have in our democracy now, is that we like the idea of democracy, but we generally don't like to see it in action.
And as a senator, you've got to be able to use the carrot and the stick approach, so to speak, and then bring people into your groupthink. At this stage of the president's presidency, is that perhaps a skill that he's really got to embrace?
Well, I think he believes in deliberative democracy. He believes that the president can act alone or shouldn't act alone. Now, some on the left have criticized him for that, for not wielding the heavy stick as often as they'd like him to. But I think coming out of that legislative experience and background, President Obama has a certain deference to Congress that we haven't often seen in recent years, and so it's part of why he's criticized.
Just I think a different style. Let's talk about Teddy Roosevelt.
Sure.
Because I understand he kind of brings in the leadership skills that so many modern day presidents have to have.
That's right. Well, I think he's arguably the first truly modern president. He decides that he's going to run the legislature, he's going to run Congress, he's going to lead budgetary issues, he's going to form a modern relationship with the media, the press back then. He's rising above and leading his party, oftentimes going against his party. He forms a third party. So that big stick philosophy actually for him developed in Albany when he was governor of New York, and he carried it with him to the White House.
George Bush had many of those qualities. One might argue that he came in using the executive portion of those talents and did it to some degree effectively.
Well, there's no doubt he had some early successes, but I also think some of what governors have a challenge with moving from the State House to the White House is a bit of hubris, the sense that they can do it all. They did it all in Arkansas and Little Rock, or they did it all in Austin and Texas. But when you get to Washington, you come to find out that the Congress is a little bit different than a state legislative experience, and so you can stumble. Governors can overreach when they reach the White House, and so they may have their share of successes, but they also may have their share of dilemmas.
A lot of people have resonated well to our current president. Time magazine makes him Person of the Year. Your thoughts on that, in relation to what you've written about in terms of leadership skills?
Well, I think, it was once said about FDR, I think it was former Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said about FDR that he was a second-rate intellect but a first-rate temperament. And I think President Obama is a first-rate intellect but also a first-rate temperament as president. He's someone who the country believes is sort of even-keeled and an honest broker in Washington. And that kind of temperament, I think, has served him well. And I think it has some relevance to his background as coming out of a legislative experience where he sees leadership as something that's mutual, that it's a joint effort. It's not he governing alone. He realizes he's in a democracy.
That temperament certainly has worked against him in some regards, though. People wanting him to be more aggressive in some areas.
Sure, but you know, if you look at any number of constituents, whether it's the Latino constituency saying he should have, you know, made immigration his #1 priority. Now, guns should be the #1 priority. African Americans have criticized him for not putting their issues to the fore. Any number of groups, gay and lesbians, and so on it goes. I think the president realizes that he can't do all things at once and please everyone. He's got to view this as a marathon rather than a sprint. And I think that at the end of the day, we'll look back at this presidency and see you know, a number of things accomplished that were pretty significant.
Would you say he is perhaps the right man for this moment, given the political climate in Washington, that you can't have that one guy that comes in and gives all the orders, that he's got to have the give and take? Is he the right guy for this climate?
Well, I don't know if not him, who? You know, if you look at having to work with not only John Boehner on one side of the aisle, but in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, these are folks who haven't exactly been predisposed to working with him.
Sure.
And the Republican Party is a lot different than it was in the 1960s when Lyndon Johnson was able to, you know, push through all types of effective legislation. The world is different now. The Republican Party is different now, and you just can't take the big stick or the bully pulpit and get your way. You've got to find a way to thread the needle and to get things done in Washington.
Right. Dr. Ambar, very insightful. Thanks for coming on and joining us. And we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me.